Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate the continued support, up to 85 subscribers now, just 15 away from my target of 100. So please do like, share and subscribe to this channel if you like what you hear. In this video I'm going to look ahead to Newcastle's game against Liverpool at St James's Park on Sunday, a way to bounce back from that defeat at Man City on Saturday night. If you want to look at my video review of that game, it's on my channel now. I also want to discuss where I think Lewis Hall might fit in at Newcastle this season. Now obviously that deal has been signed, sealed and delivered. 28 million raising to 35 million pounds as a fee next summer. It'll offer more of a balance in the defence with going forward for Kieran Trippier, but also I think what's really interesting for me is that he actually sees himself as a midfielder. I think that proves that Newcastle have really gone for this deal for the two main hallmarks of what they've done with every deal this summer and in previous windows. One, his versatility. He can play in that midfield role and he can play as in a back three as well. And two, his the opportunism, as I've mentioned in a couple of weeks ago, one of my videos. I was led to believe, I know that a lot of members of the Newcastle press pack were led to believe that centre back became the priority. There was looking like there was more deals to be done. There was more value in a deal for a centre back. A lot of targets were drawn up. A lot of players who Newcastle still like and will target in the future, I'm sure. But the thing to take from it was that Chelsea decided to do business, and Newcastle reacted. It shows how perfectly Lewis Hall really does fit in with Newcastle's ethos, Newcastle's style. Everything about Newcastle, Lewis Hall fits. But I think the really key thing is that midfield role. It wasn't something that I was aware of before speaking to a couple of people last week who've seen him at Chelsea. He was Chelsea's Player of the Year last year as well in the academy, so there's a lot of high praise for him there. Perhaps what hasn't been documented is Newcastle have the ability to play a left back who can join the midfield and make that box in midfield that you've seen Arsenal do, you've seen Manchester City do, and you've seen Liverpool do. That seems to be the next tactical innovation of the top sides, and Newcastle want to play like one of those top sides. They want to be intense with the ball and fast paced and energetic, and there's a lot of comparisons being made between Newcastle and Liverpool when Jurgen Klopp first arrived. So potentially this is something Newcastle could look at in a way to join those top clubs in gaining that advantage of another man in midfield. And it's something that we noticed with Guardiola last week, was it wasn't just players who you would naturally think would go and join the pitch, go and join the game higher up the pitch, with Manuel Akanji being one of those prime players who was going and joining the attack. I don't think it's something that's immediately on Eddie Howe's radar per se to play that style and to put Lewis Hall in midfield, but it certainly seems like an option, and it certainly seems like something that Eddie Howe can and probably will explore in being able to sort of gain that advantage in midfield, especially in those games when teams will sit deep at St James's Park, and there'll be quite a few of those games across the season. So Lewis Hall is a really, really good signing, but not potentially in the way that has been talked about now. I mean, obviously he does solve that left-back problem, as I've said, and obviously it does bring that balance. And obviously he's a young player, and I mentioned on the BBC Sport website last week in my analysis of this deal that he has solved, him and Tino Livramento have solved the fullback issue. They've got two potential England international fullbacks for the next 10-15 years sorted, and that's a fantastic place to be at this stage of the process. We'll get on to talking about that Liverpool game right now. It's another opportunity, a bit like Aston Villa a couple of weeks ago, to sort of lay down the gauntlet against a team who you would expect to be fighting for a position in that top 4, top 5. Jurgen Klopp talking about Liverpool reloaded with the signings of Alexis McAllister, who was sent off in last week's victory over Bournemouth, but will now be available to play, because for me it's the right decision. It wasn't a red card, and it was rightly overturned, so he'll be fit and firing to play in that game. And Dominic Szoboszlai, who is a really interesting early target for Newcastle this summer. I chased this story quite a lot. There was concrete interest from Newcastle. Talks went on with Leipzig. Leipzig were willing to sell and knew that he was going to go, but only for that release clause. And by the time his clause expired at the end of June, Newcastle were in that sort of log jam where they couldn't afford to break FFP before Alan St Maximin was sold, and they made other signings, mainly Harvey Barnes by that point, Tino Livramento, and obviously now Lewis Hall. So Szoboszlai is a really, really talented player. Newcastle know all about him. The difference between this game and the Aston Villa game, for example, 2 weeks ago, is that the main battle will be in the midfield. You've got Szoboszlai, you've got McAllister, who will play in that sort of deeper role, in that number 6 role, because Liverpool have made a few more sales in that department than they probably would have expected to. Fabinho's gone. There is Waruendo, who's joined from Stuttgart, Japan International, who's very highly rated and very impressive by all accounts. People who I've spoken to who've watched him in Germany, I haven't personally seen too much of him, but experienced player and has settled in quite well. So it'd be very. He's a possible starter. But also got Mohamed Salah out wide, who will play up against probably Dan Burn. This is the question of whether you would start Lewis Hall in that game. I'm not convinced that Lewis Hall will come in from the start with his age and everything that we've spoken about with Eddie Howe and adjusting to his style of play. He obviously hasn't played too much for Chelsea. He did play a little bit in pre-season, but he'll need a little bit of time, both in terms of understanding the game and also physically to get up to speed of Newcastle United under Eddie Howe. So I think it's not likely that he'll start in the game. He might come on in the second half, but I think Dan Burn will probably start again at left back. Anthony Gordon, does he go to the right or does he come out for Harvey Barnes? Gordon did okay in the first half against Manchester City, but was isolated. I don't think there's a problem with him necessarily. I think he could go over to the right, where the criticism of Miguel Almiron was much more defined, and I think he's more likely to come out of the game. I don't think he will actually. I think that personally it'll still be Gordon and Almiron on the wings behind Isak for this game, using Harvey Barnes as another impact sub. I think he's proven in the previous game at St James's Park against Aston Villa how good he can be off the bench, and I think that that's a good opportunity to exploit potentially some space in behind Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back in the second half on Sunday. In midfield, Joe Linton, doubtful whether he's going to be fit. Obviously, we'll hear from Eddie Howe tomorrow at his press conference. And whether Sean Longstaff will come in, he doesn't look 100% fit either. Elliot Anderson might get a start. He did look bright against Manchester City, but I think if Joe Linton's fit, it'll be the same team that played against Manchester City, just didn't quite get into the game. But you would expect a faster start. You would expect Newcastle to take the game to Liverpool and get more joy out of Liverpool at home than they would at the Etihad. And I think there wasn't enough in the game to suggest that changes were needed from Eddie Howe. So I think more likely that he'll start with the same team again. Potentially, if Joe Linton isn't fit, will Anderson get his chance? I think he deserves it. I said at the start of the season I would have started him in that game, and everyone was very surprised that Sandro Tonali started. Either way, it's going to be a real corker because Liverpool score a lot of goals, but they also look really, really poor defensively. So if Newcastle can get in behind McAllister, that's the target that they'll look at. Put pressure on McAllister or Endo if he starts in that role and get through, break that line. The thing that really opened the game up against Aston Villa was that high line, and Liverpool will play exactly the same way. So I think that there's real opportunity for Newcastle to play the same system and just go again. I think they'll be the same team, and I think there'll be a narrow victory for Newcastle. It'll be a really tough game because Liverpool, obviously, Mohamed Salah will play up against Dan Burn and try and get in behind himself, and that'll be a really interesting battle, and Anthony Gordon will have to double up and help defend, and there'll be lots of space around the pitch for Liverpool to exploit, but obviously their X factor will be on that right hand side of midfield with Szoboszlai to link up. While Newcastle will target that central position where McAllister or Endo will be, I think Liverpool will again target Dan Burn and target that left side of the Newcastle defence to try and get at them. There's a lack of pace if they can get in behind. Newcastle only lost to 3 teams under Eddie Howe at St James's Park, and one of them is Liverpool twice. And last season, obviously, Nick Pope's sending off didn't help, but they were 2-0 down by that point anyway because they got caught on the counter-attack. So they've got to be careful. The pace and the power of Darwin Núñez can cause problems, but they've shown how defensively sturdy they can be with a deeper line in against Manchester City. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Elliot Anderson in midfield. I think a narrow win for Newcastle. Draw wouldn't be a disastrous result of this part of the season. But ultimately, if they win this game, that'll be a second Champions League rival beaten without getting out of August at St James's Park. There's a lot of stuff that Liverpool will have learned from the way Manchester City did things last week. So Newcastle will have to step up and be brave and also be aware of the current situation. As I say, same team pretty much, I think, with the exception of potentially Joe Linton if he's injured, and it'll be a narrow victory. Thanks very much for joining me again. As I said, 85 subscribers now, 15 away from 100. Please continue to like, share and subscribe, and get in the comments as well and give me your thoughts on the game. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.